On the other hand, we don't live in a progressive country. Until we have a movement that can kind of bring the country to a certain extent. I'm torn because to a certain extent politicians can lead people somewhat, but they also need to tap into what the zeitgeist is, and the zeitgeist is not what we would actually want it to be. Somebody who perfectly espouses our beliefs is not really electable on a national level in this country. So
right.
I hope that people can find some balance and don't interpret people's disillusionment and hatred of Bush, which is real, as some kind of broad mandate for progressivism. I mean, I wish that that were true, but there's no real evidence that it is.
No, I said they handed us the election of 2006. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now there are people, and there are people like I'm going to butcher his name, Rui Teixeira, mm-hmm. and other people who have looked at the numbers and they thought that the numbers were shifting in favor of the Democrats anyway. So even if there had never been a Hurricane Katrina, they thought that our tide was rising, and I hope they're right. So I don't think that the jury is in yet at all on whether or not there's a real revival of progressivism, or whether it's just that the incompetent Bush White House handed the Democratic Party an opportunity. I think the jury is still out on that, Michelle. I really do. So the question becomes, how do you behave in a situation of imperfect information, right? It's a classic problem. And what I am saying is that there are places where I think we can make more progress than we are making publicly and even in this campaign. And the other thing that is my big hobby horse these days, and I've written about it in the Huffington Post. They were good enough to give me 3 successive postings a couple of weeks ago to say we really need to be laying down the clear lines of what we believe among ourselves without saying, will this play in Dubuque or not? We as progressives need to have a substantive conversation about what our aspirations are for progressivism. It isn't that the conservative movement came from nowhere. They were doing the hard intellectual work to create a political movement during the entire Nixon administration. Mm-hmm. So what I would like to see happen is on 2 levels. One is that we progressive intellectuals stop speculating on who's going to be the Secretary of Labor in the Obama administration and have some conversation about what our real core principles are for the 21st century. And that's what I was trying to do in the Huffington Post. And the other thing that I would like to see is that we not wound ourselves unnecessarily. And you know, obviously we're going to come down on one side. It's a risk either way, right? If we're too conservative, then we've lowballed our opportunity. If we're too aggressive, then we may lose the election. So I understand that there's risk on either side. And so it seems to me that I fear that the Obama campaign is making the error of coming down mostly on the conservative side of that risk. I think they have more room to lead than that what you just said would reflect. Am I being responsive to what you're saying?
Yes, you are.
Good.
But it's interesting because the rap on Obama right now, I mean, although we're complaining about his conservatism, the, you know, kind of broader narrative of him out there is that he's some kind of crazed radical.
Right. I think that's racial, Michelle. I have to say that. I think that crazed radical thing is really a wicked racial trope. And somebody's got to do something about, you know, saying how much of that rhetoric is race in disguise.
I mean, and
I don't know if we're going to win the election. I mean, you know, I don't know if we're going to win the election. What happened to Harold Ford in Tennessee, right?
No, it's terrifying. I think you know, it's interesting to me that people seem so confident, that so many people seem willing to kind of, you know, already start writing obituaries for John McCain.
Right.
I mean, that seems karmically dangerous to me.
But let's think about this in a fresh way, okay? What about this, just as a different way of looking at it? What if you cannot fight the Obama is a crazed radical thing with sort of centrist policy positions on, say, leaving maternity leave up to the states? Okay, that's a very conservative policy position on unpaid parental leave. Okay, so let's say you move to the center on parental leave and say, well, I think we ought to leave it up to the states rather than having the federal government advance it. I don't think that those kind of centrist positions are going to work against...
No, I think you're right. I think that it makes much more sense to say, no, I'm a liberal and I'm going to defend it, rather than to try to say, no, I'm really more of a conservative than I think you are. I mean, then in itself you're kind of making concessions to...
Right, you're doing that same moral thing. It's like, well, you hold the moral high ground by being conservative, and the closer I can get to your moral high ground, the better off the country will be. I hate that. And I just hate that. And I just wish that someone smarter than I am or more politically astute could figure out a way to push back on that, man from Mars thing, which I think is so heavily racial. I wish we could figure out a way to push back on that without giving ground on the fundamentals of our progressive policies.
I think that that's what he did. I mean, I think that that's not entirely what he's done, but he certainly has done that in certain places.
Yeah, he's trying to convey a visual and a categorical image of, this very ordinary Kansas boy who got lucky. Right. I mean, I heard the speeches, and I know that that's what they're trying to do. I just, I keep thinking about my favorite moment in American politics. Michelle, I'm so old, I actually saw it happen, which is when Joseph Welch looked at Senator McCarthy and said, "Have you no sense of decency, sir, at long last?" Mm-hmm. And I want someone on the Obama side to call it by name and defang it in the way that that McCarthy was defanged in that moment.
Or you need someone. I mean, it's interesting because Joe Biden has actually done that in terms of the foreign policy side.
Right. I am a big fan of Joe Biden, and I think he's done a fabulous job at doing that on the foreign policy side.
So yes, you basically need somebody to make the kind of same.
Right.
Statement on the cultural side of, yes, we're going to stop kind of apologizing to you for values that are
and we're going to stop, bribing you with the categorical description of women's most fundamental right. We're going to stop paying out or giving away women's interests in order to placate you for what you think about us, which is so heavily racially driven. I'm not smart enough to figure this out, Michelle, but that's where I think, some really fresh, new, out-of-the-box thinking could be done.